Joined by the one and only Patrick Buchanan. Pat, you really did it this week.
Well,
Putin puts out an op-ed. You say, wow, this thing is outstanding. He looks like a statement, and the rest is history. Hey, what's this all about?
Well, I tell you, I was at Greta's show on the other night when it broke, and they gave me the op-ed about 5 minutes before, and I read it quickly twice. And I went on the air and said what I yet believe. This is an outstanding and deft piece of work by Vladimir Putin or the folks who wrote it for him. What they've done is they've touched on all the powerful arguments some of us had made as, if you will, anti-interventionist conservatives, reiterated those, and made one point after another, which the vast majority of Americans agree with now. And I think he did it in a way that was very effective, and the effectiveness, Pete, can be told by the hysteria that's broken out inside the Beltway.
Yeah, no, I can tell you, I could kind of relate. You know, I was a new congressman, 1993. I went to my first State of the Union speech,
Right.
And Bill Clinton gives a speech, and we both know Bill Clinton can give a great speech.
Right.
So, you know, I'm in office for a couple of months, and I go in and, you know, I listen to the State of the Union speech. I do all of my radio interviews, and I say, you know, I thought he gave a great speech, delivered a great speech. I didn't say whether I agreed with the content or anything, but boy, when I got home that weekend, wherever I went, pumping gas, going out to eat, people are saying, we ain't ever voting for you again. We can't believe you endorsed Clinton and all that. All I said was technically he gave a great speech, and I think that's what you're saying, that, you know, he and I think this was,
as a piece of propaganda, it was outstanding.
Yes.
But let me also say, and when I use the term statesman, I mean, Vladimir Putin has gone up the steps on the upper dive, the 15-foot dive, and brought the kid down who was about to jump.
Well,
and that's Barack Obama, and he has moved effectively to basically keep the United States out of a war which I think would be a complete disaster.
Yeah.
And if somebody gives him a Nobel Peace Prize, one of those tin badges, I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah, see, I looked at, I read the speech a couple of times as well, and I thought it was very, very well written. He hit all, like you said, he hit all of the hot buttons that the American people were concerned about. And I think, as I read it, you know, whether we agree with the content or believe that, you know, they're actually living up to what he's saying, you know, those are different issues. But the stuff that was written and the stuff that he put out was put out with a certain discipline, and it was, you know, that we yearn for out of this administration on American foreign policy. They were disciplined. They knew what they wanted to say, and it seems like, you know, we've got the Secretary of State saying one thing one day, the president's, you know, contradicting. It's a red line, then it's a pink line, and all those types of things. You know, and we yearn for that type of leadership here in the U.S. again.
Well, you know, Pete, what I said was on Greta that Putin in this op-ed piece makes a stronger case for America not engaging in strikes on Syria than the president did for the strikes the night before. Much more compelling, conclusive, the arguments against it, the likelihood of this, the terrorists among the rebels, what they could do if they got control of various weapons. We saw what happened in Libya, where those weapons were all scattered and wound up in Mali. And then, of course, he speaks from his perspective, but he's saying, in effect, to the American people, I mean, you look what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and these other places. Do you really want to get into another war? And I think most Americans would say, and we're saying about 80% of them, no, the U.S. military doesn't want the war. The American people don't want the war. Most of the Congress don't want the war. So I think that, coupled with the fact that, you know, as Barack Obama called him, you know, the kid, the bored kid slouching in the back of the class is now the prize student.
Yeah, he didn't, this piece was not done by a bored student. This was done by a well-oiled machine. You know, he puts Russia in the position of saying, hey, we're going to, you know, at least from a perception standpoint, hey, we don't want a nuclear Iran. We want to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem as much as you do.
Right.
Raising the issue that some here in America have raised that said, hey, there are American fighters over in Syria. When that is done, are they going to come back here and raise havoc in the United States? He's saying it could happen in Russia.
Exactly. He doesn't want them in Chechnya. He doesn't want them taking those weapons out of there. We have some interest in conflict with the Russians, but in some cases our interests coincide. Look, he doesn't want to have to respond to an American airstrike by moving in surface-to-air missiles or moving in weaponry into Syria, enlarging and widening the war, increasing the likelihood of a war that drags in Iran and basically totals the global economy. And so I think what he has done also, he's allowed Barack Obama to say, it's my hard line has brought everybody around here. And he's letting Barack Obama get away with that. And so I think he's handled it very well. But let me say this, Kerry's got a hellish problem on his hands for this reason. The Russians will slow walk this thing at the UN.
Yep.
And their Syrian partners playing the bad cop will say, okay, we're going to give the list of all our weaponry, but in return, you got to stop supporting the opposition. If we're going to give up these weapons, you got to stop sending weapons to the opposition. You got to give up these threats that you've got us under, because we don't want to negotiate under threat. You wouldn't, and we don't want to do that. And the Russians will run their separate operations slowly. And, I don't know what John Kerry up there does. He just sits there, and the threat of force, the Russians can block in the Security Council, and the Republicans will block in the Congress of the United States. So Wyatt Earp down there in the White House doesn't have any guns.
I think that's exactly right. He doesn't know exactly where he's going to go. But when John Kerry threw that statement out a week ago that said, well, if they turn over all their weapons, of course we won't strike. Of course they won't do it. Painted us in a box. And I think, again, it was, even though we've got thousands of people working in the State Department, it was not a disciplined message that we were sending to Syria, the Middle East, or Russia when we're talking off the cuff. One other question on what did you think of his statements on American exceptionalism?
Well, all of us, I count myself a patriot. I think this is the greatest country in the world. I think it's divinely inspired. I think we got our sins behind us, but with the things we've accomplished are unbelievable in the history of man. I think we're the first power economically in a lot of other ways. But I do understand what Putin is doing here, because you go out in the world, take Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, when she announced, we use force. When we use force, it's because we are the indispensable nation. We see further than others. If you're in a foreign country, in China or something, and you're hearing this exceptionalism constantly thrown in your face as though the Americans have been given some God-given right to decide the composition of governments and states all over the world, that sense of hubris that we've displayed, I think, has been deeply damaging to us. So I think sure that Putin put that in there deliberately, or he had it put in there deliberately, because he knows it will be enormously well received even by some American allies.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And then he closes it, of course, by saying, we're all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessing, we must not forget that God created us equal. It's amazing that is coming from Putin, the president of Russia.
But let me say one thing on that people don't know about Putin. He is very proud of the fact, he says it all the time in Russia, that his mother secretly had him baptized as a baby. And lately, because he realizes they have no governing philosophy anymore, communism is dead, and Russia has no governing, he has sought to reestablish the Russian Orthodox Church as basically the former of morality and ethics and culture. He went down to Kiev and celebrated the 1,000th plus anniversary of the conversion of Ukraine and Russia by St. Cyril and Methodists. So I think seeing that, and I've written on that before, on I think there's a level of authenticity to that. But secondly, it has probably great appeal to many Americans who see our own culture as pretty depraved.
Well, that's an amazing statement, and it's very, very interesting to watch what's going on in Russia.
Interesting world, Pete.
Yeah, you've also talked, and I think you've just written about the need for Congress to reassert itself into foreign policy.
I do believe this. Look, we're in this trouble for one reason. President Obama popped off like some high school kid saying Assad must go and don't cross my red line. The implication is the greatest country on earth is going to war if you do this. He had no authority to do that. And you cannot have him threatening Iran, threatening Syria, threatening anyone when the Congress of the United States, which alone has the power to take us to war absent an attack upon us, hasn't authorized him. He makes these threats that the Congress has not given him the power to carry out. So that's why I think the Congress has got to say, look, absent an attack on this country or an imminent threat, that the President of the United States has no right to take us into a war of choice.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing is we have not had a defining foreign policy as to what our national interests are for getting involved, in the ways that we have in Egypt, Libya, or Syria. And it's time for Congress and the President to actually develop a foreign policy that talks about how we're going to use our limited influence in the world to make sure that we achieve our national interests and make sure that it's understandable to each other and to the American people.
Well, yep, I agree, but I will say this. One of the problems is, I have a lot of friends, and we were on all fours from 1960 through 1991. I would count myself a cold warrior. I opposed only one military action during that time of my government. That's when I urged Ronald Reagan not to put the Marines in Lebanon. I said, we got no vital interest in there, and that's a civil war. But since the end of the Cold War, I've had a falling out with some conservatives when I say that, I didn't think the Iraq War was a good idea. I didn't think it was a necessary war. And I didn't think Libya was a good idea. We have no use for Gaddafi. But what are we doing knocking him down? Do we know what's going to replace him? So I think, but on the other side, there are people who still believe that we got to democratize the Middle East and we got to involve ourselves there. We got to take down the Syrians. We got to take down the Iranians. I don't think there's any unanimity inside either party or any basic agreement on what American foreign policy should be and what our interests are in the world.
I think that's exactly right. That's why I think it's time to take a pause, to step back and see if we can't get some agreement out of these things, because as we take a look at what's happened over the last 12 years, Afghanistan and Iraq have not turned out the way that we wanted them to. The response by the president in 2009 to the Green Revolution, the actions in Egypt and Libya, none of these have turned out quite the way or anywhere close to what we had hoped or expected. And it's time to go back and reassess what's working and what's not.
And not only that, it's we lost 6,000 guys in those two wars and 40,000 wounded warriors, and millions of refugees and hundreds of thousands of dead in those countries and $2 trillion in debt. One after another of these wars, and the country is pretty close to officially bankrupt. And so you got to add all these things in there in devising these policies, but you tell me how we get together John McCain and Rand Paul.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But it is tough, but it's a dialogue that needs to take place. I'll tell you, I was excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining us. And, you're absolutely right. Putin gave a great speech. We may not agree with the content. We may not like the content. But the way it was delivered to promote Russia's self-interest was masterful, and we yearn for the time where our leadership will speak with the same kind of clarity promoting U.S. interests. Pat, thanks for joining us today.
All right, good luck, and I'm sure you'll run Rush right off the air.
All right. Hey, thanks. All right.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. You bet.